Ce l'ha duro! 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 Capra ignorante!
Hello guys and welcome back to the 27th episode of Italian Politician of the Week. I am Ipernik and I make weekly videos on Italian history and politics in English. It has been a while, but this will be the first special episode of the season. You guys really wanted to see a video on Antonio Gramsci, one of the most important communist thinkers of the 20th century. However, after reading about his contributions to the ideology, I decided to make a video about the early history of the Italian Communist Party and some of its most important early members as well. If you would like me to make a video or a series about a full history of the Italian Communist Party all the way up to the more recent spin-offs, be sure to like and comment the video. The moment we reach 35 likes and 20 comments, I will start working on it right away. The people I want to talk about today are Amedeo Bordiga, Antonio Gramsci, Umberto Terracini and Palmiro Togliatti. Let's begin with the audience's favorite. Antonio Francesco Gramsci was born in Sardinia in 1891. His childhood was anything but pleasant since his family was very poor, and from a very young age Gramsci was plagued with problems with his health, namely pot disease that stunted his growth and gave him a hunchback. Due to this, Gramsci was just 5 feet tall, which is still taller than Brunetta. He will finish his secondary education in Cagliari, where he lodged with his older brother Gennaro, a former soldier whose time in the ranks had made him a militant socialist, which is not a good direction to take at the time. However, Gramsci's sympathies laid closer to the grievances of impoverished Sardinian peasants and miners. This will bring him closer to the ideas of class struggle and communism in general. In 1911, he won a scholarship at the University of Turin, where he studied literature and linguistics. Turin at the time was going through a big industrial revolution. The car industry was booming, and this sparked a big need for factory workers who were hired from other regions. With the sudden increase in number of factory workers unions emerged, and with them came socialist circles. Gramsci will start attending socialist meetings in 1913, where he began formulating his political stances. Although he showed great talent for his studies, Gramsci had financial problems and poor health. Together with his growing political commitments, this led to him abandoning his education in early 1915 at age 24. By this time, he had acquired an extensive knowledge of history and philosophy, which made him stand out and therefore was essential to his rise in the ranks. His initial influence was also owed to his great skills in journalism. He wrote for Avanti and Il Grido del Popolo from 1914 up until 1919, where he decided to make his own newspaper alongside Togliatti, Terracini and some guy called Angelo Tasca. The newspaper came out weekly. It was called The New Order and it was a big hit. That same year, the Italian Socialist Party, despite the deep divisions among the classical socialists and the communists, joined the Comintern, entering the Soviet Union's sphere of influence. This was great news for Gramsci since he had followed the revolutionary events in Russia since the very beginning, and he hoped to achieve similar results in Italy too eventually, alongside most of his friends in the communist current of the Socialist Party. The divisions, however, were problematic and became unbearable after the communists started to help workers take over the factories they worked in August 1920 through small local insurrections. In January 1921, in response to the instability and the plans of leaving the Comintern, the communist current left the Socialist Party and founded the Italian Communist Party, led by Amedeo Bordiga. Since there is not much to say about Bordiga compared to the other three, I'm going to take the liberty to get sidetracked and tell you a bit about him before I move on with Gramsci. Bordiga was an engineering graduate from Naples who became interested in communism in his teen years. He founded a few groups dedicated to Karl Marx before actually joining the Socialist Party. The communist secession from the party, led by Bordiga, not only had a lot of sense, but was also hardly surprising. He was anti-democratic. He perceived representative democracy as nothing more than the product of the bourgeoisie. But don't get him wrong, he also despised one-party states, describing them as the culmination of the bourgeois democracy. He saw himself as a Leninist. He wanted to push for a dictatorship of the proletariat after a violent revolution, where everything was collectivized and private property was abolished. Bordiga led the PCI according to Comintern's directions. However, in 1923 he was arrested by Mussolini's regime, and to succeed him will be none other than Gramsci himself, who had completely different ideas. Gramsci taught that the bourgeoisie came into power not through class war and by force entirely, but through consent. That's because the dominant class not only owns the means of production, but also has cultural hegemony on society. He differentiated the upper classes into two categories: la classe dominante, as I mentioned before, the dominant class, and la classe dirigente, which roughly translates to the establishment. The first one rules through force alone, while the other one has control over the cultural hegemony and therefore determines how people think. Therefore, if the Communist Party took over in a revolution, it wouldn't be able to rule properly because they wouldn't have the consent of the people. So before starting a revolution, the PCI should first work on reaching cultural hegemony by joining the establishment through elections or whatever other legitimate methods, and change things on an institutional level from the inside before the revolution. Gramsci's ideas were revolutionary, pun intended, and I like to think they are the most logical explanation for why the Italian Communist Party was so unique and popular. Sadly, Gramsci was arrested too in 1926 by the fascist regime. However, he was not as lucky as Bordiga, since he died in 1937 after health complications caused by the awful conditions he was kept in. Mussolini was aware of his health but refused to free him unless he recognized his regime, but Gramsci never submitted. For this reason, he is seen as somewhat of a martyr today. Gramsci has a lot of merits. The works he wrote in prison have a lot of academic value for historians, linguists, and political scientists. However, his popularity as a symbol of communist resistance and resilience against fascism is owed to his successor as party leader, Umberto Terracini, specifically his propaganda posters. Togliatti was born in 1893 in Genoa, though his family actually originated from Piedmont. He spent his childhood a bit all over the place due to his dad's career. He attended the University of Turin like Gramsci and graduated in law. He accompanied Gramsci first in the foundation of the New Order and then continued developing his political career in the Communist Party. By the time he had become its secretary, the PCI was basically illegal and Togliatti had to self-exile himself in France and Russia from 1926 up until 1944. Due to his frequent absence, Ruggero Grieco would take charge sometimes and help him run the party. He was responsible for the alliance with the socialists in 1935. Togliatti was a very active member of the Comintern and grew close to Stalin, even going as far as to adhere to the abolition of communist groups or assassination of communist leaders that didn't fall into Stalinist line. Political scientist Zaslavsky argued that Togliatti and the other leaders of the PCI were basically subservient to Stalin. His supporters also argue that Togliatti was primarily a Stalinist and that he remained so for years after Stalin's death in 1953. Furthermore, they say that it was Stalin who ordered Togliatti to play a moderate role in Italian politics because the time was not yet ripe for a showdown with capitalism. Proof of this can be seen on Togliatti's papers, either from the Kremlin or personal. For example, Stalin forced the PCI to work against the Marshall Plan. Unfortunately for them, this caused a loss of much support from Italian voters who were hoping for American financial aid. While this interpretation is very valid, I believe that Togliatti did, at least to some extent, believe in Gramsci's theories and strategies. If it hadn't been for him, Togliatti wouldn't have cooperated so closely with the Kingdom of Italy and the rest of the Liberation Committee during and shortly after the war. Furthermore, despite despite Stalinist relations, Togliatti always kept great relations with Tito. I'd even go as far as to argue that Togliatti actually had the means to overtake the government if he wanted to. He had thousands of partisans on his side, the Gasperi's cabinets were always changing, and the socialists were also on their side all the way up to 1947. Despite this, when Togliatti was shot during a rally in 1947, he didn't call for a conflict. Instead, he just said to his supporters that he was okay through radio and that he was going to recover soon. At the end of the day, it is a bit hard to say for sure what Togliatti thought, because unlike his colleagues, he was a lot less open about his views. The last communist I want to talk about today is Umberto Terracini. He was born in 1895 in Genoa from a Jewish family of Piedmont. He also graduated in law in Turin and founded the newspaper and the PCI with the others. He stands out for three main reasons. Terracini was strongly opposed to the Molotov-Ribbentrop Treaty of 1939 due to Germany's anti-Semitism. Since you couldn't criticize Stalin at the time, he was kicked out of the party and reintegrated only 4 years later in secret while he was in exile in Switzerland. The other reason that makes him special is the fact that between 1947 and 1948 he was the president of the Constitutional Assembly, making him the holder of the third highest charge of government after the Nicola, who was president of the Republic, and the Gasperi, who was prime minister. Due to his position, he is also one of the main signers of the Italian Constitution. The third point that makes Terracini be remembered is his support for the authoritarian methods of the USSR, namely the situation in Hungary in 1956. I guess because there were no Jews involved this time. As the Communist Party put distance between them and the USSR, Terracini lost a lot of edge and spent his last 20 years in parliament as senator until his death in 1983. He was the last one of the boys to pass. Togliatti died in 1963, Bordiga in 1970, and Gramsci, you know already. Alright, that's it for now. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I found it particularly enlightening. Be sure to subscribe, like the video if you haven't already, and yeah, as soon as we reach the like and comment goal, I will start working on the sequel, as I promised. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to join the Discord, and thanks to Graphite for the art, the thumbnail art. That's it.